Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I'd been driving trucks for 12 years when everything changed that August in 2018. Interstate 40 through Texas was my bread and butter. Refrigerated loads from California to Oklahoma, sometimes all the way to Arkansas. My wife Carolyn kept telling me to find local work, stay closer to home with her and our boys, but the long hauls paid better, and honestly, I liked the solitude. There's something peaceful about those endless stretches of highway, just you and the CB radio, and whatever podcast you've downloaded for the night drives. I had my routines down to a science. Which truck stops had the cleanest showers, where to get decent coffee at 3 a.m., which dispatchers would actually answer their phones on weekends. Life made sense out there on the asphalt, everything organized into mile markers and delivery windows. That particular Thursday started like any other. Picked up a load of frozen vegetables in Bakersfield. Had to get them to Oklahoma City by Saturday morning. The temperature gauge on my dash showed 104 degrees as I pulled into the weigh station near Amarillo around 4 in the afternoon. I remember the exact time because I'd just called Carolyn to check in, told her I'd probably push through to Oklahoma that night if I didn't get too tired. The weigh station was busy but not packed, maybe 8 or 9 rigs lined up for inspection. While I waited my turn, this guy in a white pickup truck with government plates pulled up beside my cab and knocked on the passenger door. Clean-shaven, probably mid-40s, wearing a yellow safety vest over a blue polo shirt with some kind of official-looking badge clipped to his chest pocket. He held up a clipboard and gestured for me to roll down my window. "Federal Safety Compliance Check," he said, voice all business. "New regulation went into effect last month. We're required to inspect all cabs for proper emergency equipment placement. Should only take 5 minutes." Now, I'd been through hundreds of inspections over the years, but they were always done by DOT officers in uniform, not guys in pickup trucks. Still, he had the badge, the clipboard, even showed me an official-looking letter on Department of Transportation letterhead. Said they were using contractors to speed up the inspection process. Mentioned something about a series of accidents involving improperly secured fire extinguishers. He rattled off regulation numbers. Sounded like he knew exactly what he was talking about. The way he kept checking his watch, tapping his pen against the clipboard. Everything about him screamed government bureaucrat just trying to get through his day. I unlocked the passenger door and let him climb up into the cab. Big mistake, but hindsight's always crystal clear, isn't it? He immediately started checking things off on his form. Fire extinguisher location, emergency triangles, first aid kit. He had this weird habit of running his fingers along the edges of everything he inspected, like he was checking for dust or something. Then he pulled out this roll of small silver stickers, maybe an inch square, with a holographic seal that caught the light. "Passed inspection," he explained, peeling one off and pressing it firmly against the inside of my passenger window, right in the bottom corner where it wouldn't obstruct the view. The sticker had tiny print I couldn't read from the driver's seat, some kind of serial number or code. He pressed on it for a good 10 seconds, making sure it was completely adhered, then stepped back to examine his work like he was hanging a picture frame. While he was doing all this, he kept asking me questions. How many hours I'd been driving, when was my last break, if I ever experienced neck pain from the constant vibration of the cab. Seemed like small talk at first, the kind of stuff you'd expect from someone who deals with truckers all day. But then he asked something that struck me as odd. Did I usually sleep in my cab or get a motel room? When I told him I mostly slept in the cab to save money, he nodded and made another note on his clipboard. "Smart," he said. "But you should really consider upgrading your sleeping setup. Lot of drivers getting robbed at rest stops lately." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out what looked like a thin rope or cord, maybe 3 feet long, with loops tied at both ends. "This is a new security device we're recommending," he said, demonstrating how to wrap it around the door handle from inside. Prevents anyone from jimmying the lock while you're asleep. He handed me the cord, insisted I keep it as part of some safety initiative they were running. The material felt strange. Not quite rope, not quite cable, somewhere in between with an almost waxy coating. He watched me handle it, then asked if I wanted him to show me the proper securing technique for maximum effectiveness. Something about the way he said it, the way his eyes stayed fixed on my neck while he talked, made me deeply uncomfortable. I told him I'd figure it out myself, thanks, and that's when his whole demeanor shifted for just a second. His jaw clenched, his breathing got shallow, and he gripped his clipboard so tight his knuckles went white. But just as quickly, he recovered, gave me this practiced smile and said, "Suit yourself," before climbing back down from the cab. Watched him walk back to his pickup. Noticed he sat there for a good 5 minutes just staring at my truck before finally driving away. I made it to Oklahoma City without incident, dropped my load and picked up another headed back west. But that weird encounter stuck with me. At my next stop, a Flying J outside Weatherford, I ran into Tommy Nguyen, another driver I'd known for years. We were grabbing coffee when I mentioned the safety inspector, described the whole strange interaction. Tommy's face went pale. He'd had the exact same experience 3 days earlier. Same white pickup, same yellow vest, same weird rope thing. He'd actually let the guy demonstrate the securing technique and said the man had wrapped it around the cabin door handle, then suddenly yanked it tight, showing how it could also work as an emergency tourniquet if needed. The way the guy had looked at him while pulling that cord taut, Tommy said, felt like being sized up by a predator. We compared notes and realized we'd both gotten those silver stickers. Tommy still had his, and when we looked at it under the truck stop's fluorescent lights, we could barely make out tiny numbers that seemed to be GPS coordinates. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about that cord the guy had given me, still sitting on my dashboard where I'd tossed it. Around 2 a.m., I was scrolling through trucker forums on my phone when I found a thread that made me sit straight up in my bunk. "Anyone else meet a safety inspector in a white pickup?" Posted 2 weeks ago by a driver named Carl Brennan. The responses were scattered but consistent. At least 6 drivers had encountered this guy along I-40 through Texas and New Mexico. But here's what really got me. Carl Brennan hadn't posted anything since that original message. I searched his username, found he was a regular contributor, posted almost daily about routes and traffic conditions. Then nothing. Complete radio silence after mentioning the inspector. I found 2 other drivers in that thread who'd gone quiet around the same time. Guys who were previously active members of the forum. I spent the rest of that night researching, calling other drivers I knew, trying to piece together what was happening. Around 4 a.m. I reached Bradley Foster, an old-timer who'd been driving for 30 years. Brad told me something that changed everything. His nephew worked dispatch for the state police, and they'd found 3 truckers dead in their cabs over the past month, all along the same stretch of I-40. The deaths had been ruled as medical incidents initially, heart attacks or strokes, but they'd recently noticed something connecting them. Each victim had those silver inspection stickers on their windows, and more importantly, each had been strangled with what appeared to be the same type of homemade ligature. The cops were keeping it quiet to avoid panic, but they were actively investigating. Brad's nephew said the killer was using those stickers to mark his targets, probably coming back to find them at rest stops using the GPS coordinates embedded in the sticker codes. The cord he gave out wasn't for security. It was the murder weapon, and he wanted his victims to keep it close. By sunrise, I was pulling into a state police station in Weatherford, that cord in a plastic bag on my passenger seat. The detective I spoke with, a woman named Vasquez with tired eyes and coffee stains on her sleeve, took one look at that sticker on my window and immediately called for backup. Within an hour, they had a forensics team scraping it off with special tools, photographing every angle, documenting the GPS coordinates it contained. Detective Vasquez showed me photos of the other victims, all middle-aged men, all long-haul drivers, all found in their locked cabs with those cords wrapped around their necks. The killer had been climbing into their cabs while they slept, using his knowledge of their routines from the inspection questions to time his attacks perfectly. He knew which drivers slept in their cabs, knew they'd be alone, knew exactly when they'd be most vulnerable. What really got me was the last photo she showed. Carl Brennan, the driver from the forum, found 4 days ago at a rest stop I'd used dozens of times. They kept me at the station for hours, going over every detail of my encounter with the fake inspector. I helped them create a composite sketch. His rectangular face, the way his brown hair was parted severely to the left, that small scar cutting through his right eyebrow, the way he held his shoulders unnaturally rigid like he was always at attention. Detective Vasquez said I was lucky. Based on the pattern they'd identified, he typically returned to attack within 72 hours of the initial contact. I'd been marked for death and didn't even know it. They put out an APB for the white pickup, sent warnings to every truck stop along I-40, posted alerts on all the trucker forums and CB channels. The investigation revealed he'd been studying DOT procedures for months, had somehow gotten hold of authentic letterhead and forms, had manufactured those official-looking stickers with embedded tracking technology. He'd turned the very systems meant to protect drivers into tools for hunting them. The detail that still haunts me: he'd kept notebooks rating each potential victim on their compliance level, how easily they let him into their cabs, how isolated they seemed, how predictable their routes were. 2 days later, they caught him at a rest stop near Albuquerque, sitting in his pickup watching a truck he'd marked the day before. His name was Robert Hutchins, a former DOT employee who'd been fired 3 years earlier for inappropriate conduct. Specifically, he'd been obsessed with the vulnerability of sleeping drivers and had submitted multiple reports about security flaws that read more like murder plans. In his truck, they found 14 more of those cords, a box of those tracking stickers, and detailed notes on dozens of drivers, including their routes, sleep schedules, and personal information he'd gathered during his fake inspections. He'd killed 7 men before they stopped him. I quit long-haul driving after that. Took a local delivery job that has me home every night. Still drive past truckers sleeping at rest stops sometimes, and wonder how many of them would open their doors to someone with a clipboard and a safety vest. That little silver sticker left a mark on my window even after they removed it. A faint square outline I can see when the light hits just right. Carolyn wants me to replace the window, but I keep it as a reminder. Not everyone who claims to be keeping you safe actually is. The 18-wheeler has been home for me and my wife Diane for the past 11 years, hauling everything from produce to electronics across the country. It was late September 2016 when things started getting weird on our regular Denver to Chicago run. We'd been doing that route twice a month for 3 years straight, knew every truck stop, every diner, every pothole on Interstate 80. Diane handled the paperwork and navigation while I did most of the driving, though she'd take over when I needed rest. We had a good system going, made decent money, and honestly loved the freedom of the open road. That Thursday morning when we pulled out of Denver with a load of sporting goods, the CB radio was buzzing with the usual chatter, weather updates, speed trap warnings, and that familiar gravelly voice we'd been hearing for months now. A driver who went by Nighthawk. Nighthawk had this distinctive way of talking, real slow and deliberate, like he was choosing each word carefully. He drove a black Peterbilt with custom chrome exhaust stacks that looked like fangs when you saw them in your mirrors at night. We'd exchanged pleasantries dozens of times at various stops, though something about him always made Diane uncomfortable. She said his eyes never seemed to blink enough, and he had this habit of licking his lips constantly, like a lizard testing the air. But truckers are an odd bunch anyway, and you learn not to judge. That particular Thursday, though, the CB was full of nervous talk about a third missing person along our route, a college kid named Jeremy who'd vanished from a rest stop near North Platte just 2 days earlier. The other 2 had disappeared over the past month, both young men traveling alone, last seen at truck stops we frequented. Around noon, we stopped at a pilot station near Sterling to refuel and grab lunch. The place was packed with truckers all talking about the disappearances, and I noticed Nighthawk's rig parked at the far end of the lot. Inside the diner, an older driver named Bill was showing everyone photos on his phone, screenshots from security footage the cops had released. The images were grainy, but they showed each missing person talking to someone just outside the camera's view at different locations. Bill pointed out something that made everyone go quiet. In each photo, you could just barely make out the edge of black truck with distinctive chrome stacks in the background. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing. Diane grabbed my arm under the table, her nails digging in hard enough to leave marks. We decided to push through to Chicago without any more stops, but around 8 that evening, our engine started making a grinding noise I'd never heard before. The temperature gauge was climbing fast, and I had no choice but to pull off at a small, mostly abandoned truck stop near Kearney. The place only had 2 overhead lights working, casting these long, distorted shadows across the cracked asphalt. We were the only rig there at first, and I popped the hood to check the coolant levels while Diane stayed in the cab with the doors locked. That's when we heard it, the distinctive rumble of Nighthawk's Peterbilt pulling in behind us. He parked about 50 feet away, his engine idling, headlights still on and pointed directly at us. Through the glare, I could barely make out his silhouette in the driver's seat, perfectly still, just watching. I tried to focus on the engine, but my hands kept fumbling with the radiator cap. The coolant was bone dry, which made no sense. I'd checked it that morning like always. Then I noticed something that made my chest tighten. Fresh scratches around the drain plug, like someone had loosened it recently with pliers. The realization hit me hard. This wasn't mechanical failure. Someone had sabotaged our truck while we were inside that diner. I glanced back at Nighthawk's rig, and now his door was open, but I couldn't see him anywhere. The overhead light nearest to us suddenly flickered and went out completely, leaving us in a pocket of darkness between his headlights and the distant glow of the station's convenience store. Diane's voice crackled over our handheld radio, barely a whisper. "He's walking around his trailer. Something's dripping from the back." Before I could respond, the smell hit me. That unmistakable copper tang of fresh blood mixed with something else, something chemical like bleach or ammonia. The wind had shifted, carrying it from Nighthawk's trailer straight to where I stood. I grabbed a flashlight from our toolbox and aimed it toward his rig, the beam cutting through the darkness. What I saw made my legs go weak. A steady stream of dark liquid dripping from the trailer's back corner, pooling on the asphalt, in a spreading stain that looked black under the harsh LED light. Nighthawk emerged from behind his trailer then, wiping his hands on a rag that looked soaked through with the same dark substance. He wasn't trying to hide anymore. He stood there in the open, maybe 30 feet away, his head tilted at an unnatural angle like he was studying us. His lips were moving, but no sound came out, just this repetitive motion like he was practicing words he wanted to say. Diane must have called 911 because I heard her giving our location through the radio, her voice steady despite everything. I started backing toward our cab, keeping the flashlight trained on Nighthawk, who began walking toward us with these measured, deliberate steps. That's when he finally spoke, his voice carrying across the lot clear as day. "You folks need some help? Awful dangerous being broken down out here at night. Lots of bad people on these roads." The way he said it, with this flat, emotionless tone while that blood kept dripping behind him, made every hair on my neck stand straight up. I reached our truck and yanked open the door, practically throwing myself inside. Diane already had our tire iron in her lap and the engine running. Apparently there was just enough coolant left to limp somewhere else. But Nighthawk was now standing directly in front of our truck, palms pressed against the hood. That same mechanical smile stretched across his face. He started walking around to my driver's side door, and that's when we heard them. Muffled sounds coming from his trailer, like someone pounding on metal from the inside. The sounds got louder, more desperate, and then we heard a voice, young and terrified, screaming words I couldn't quite make out. Nighthawk's expression changed instantly, the fake smile dropping into something cold and furious. He sprinted back toward his trailer, yanking something from his jacket. It looked like a syringe or maybe a small knife. Diane grabbed the gear shift, screaming at me to drive, just drive, anywhere but here. I slammed it into gear and floored it, clipping the edge of a concrete barrier as we tore out of that lot. In the mirrors, I saw Nighthawk standing in the middle of the road behind us, not chasing, just watching, getting smaller and smaller until the darkness swallowed him whole. The speedometer hit 90 as we flew down that empty highway, the engine screaming in protest, steam starting to pour from under the hood. We made it about 12 miles before the engine finally gave out completely, coasting to a stop on the shoulder near an overpass. Diane was already on the phone with the state police, giving them Nighthawk's description and location, while I kept watch through the mirrors, terrified we'd see those chrome stacks appearing in the distance. The police showed up within 15 minutes. Apparently our call wasn't the first they'd gotten. A trooper named Officer Walsh told us they'd been tracking similar reports for weeks but could never pin down the suspect. He radioed for backup to check that truck stop immediately, while another officer drove us to the nearest police station. We spent the next 4 hours giving statements, looking at photos, describing every detail we could remember about Nighthawk's rig, his face, that horrible dripping sound. Around 2 in the morning, Walsh came back with an update that made Diane break down crying. They'd found Nighthawk's trailer abandoned at the stop, the back doors wide open. Inside the trailer, they discovered a hidden compartment behind a false wall, equipped with restraints bolted to the floor and walls covered in scratch marks. The blood we'd seen was from Jeremy, the college kid who'd gone missing 2 days earlier. He was alive but barely conscious, severely dehydrated and showing signs of repeated drugging. They found personal items from at least 6 other victims hidden in various compartments, including the 2 other missing men from our route, and 3 more they hadn't even connected yet. Nighthawk himself, whose real name turned out to be Walter Simmons, had vanished into the prairie darkness on foot, leaving his rig behind like a discarded shell. The manhunt went on for 3 days, helicopters circling overhead, dogs tracking through the fields, but he seemed to have just evaporated. They found his footprints leading to a drainage culvert about a mile from the truck stop, and after that, nothing. The theory was he had another vehicle stashed somewhere, maybe had been planning this exit strategy all along. We never drove that route again. Couldn't do it. Every black truck we saw for months afterward made us both tense up, and the sound of a CB radio crackling to life would make Diane leave the room. We switched to shorter local runs around Colorado, took a massive pay cut but kept our sanity mostly intact. The FBI contacted us a few more times over the following year, showing us photos of potential sightings, asking if we remembered any other details. Jeremy survived and went on to testify about his 3 days in that trailer, the drugs, the voices he heard through the walls, the way Simmons would whisper to him about the collection he was building. 2 of the other victims were never found, just their wallets and keys tucked into a box beneath the trailer's floorboards. The investigation revealed that Simmons had been driving trucks for 23 years, crisscrossing the country under various aliases, and they suspected he had other trailers, other hiding spots they'd never locate. What haunts me most is how normal he seemed all those times we talked on the radio. Just another driver complaining about traffic and weather, sharing jokes and stories over the airwaves. They finally caught him 14 months later at a truck stop in Montana, living under a different name, driving a red Kenworth this time. A rookie driver recognized him from the wanted posters and called it in while Simmons was sleeping in his cab. When they arrested him, he had another victim in a hidden compartment, a 19-year-old hitchhiker who'd been missing for 5 days. The kid survived, traumatized but alive. Simmons never did explain why he let Jeremy live that night when we discovered him. Never explained much of anything, actually. He took a plea deal to avoid the death penalty, got multiple life sentences without parole, and now sits in a federal prison in Illinois. We had to testify at the sentencing, and seeing him in that orange jumpsuit cleaned up and quiet, he looked like nothing more than a tired old man. But when he looked at us from the defendant's table, his lips started moving again in that same soundless way, like he was still practicing words he'd never get to say. Diane and I sold our rig 2 weeks after the trial, used the money to open a small hardware store in Wyoming, and we've never looked back. Some roads you drive down once, and once is more than enough. "3 years into driving 18-wheelers, and I thought I'd seen everything the road had to offer. I was hauling frozen seafood from Portland down to Phoenix that June in 2014. Just another routine run that paid $1,200. My Peterbilt had over 800,000 miles on her, but she still purred like a kitten when I needed her to. That Thursday afternoon, I'd already logged 7 hours behind the wheel, and federal regulations meant I needed to stop soon. The GPS showed a truck stop about 40 miles ahead in a town called Millbrook, right off Route 93 in Nevada. Never heard of the place before, but the reviews online said they had decent diesel prices and a clean shower facility, which was all I really needed after sweating through another desert crossing. I pulled into Millbrook Truck Plaza around 4:30 in the afternoon, and right away, the place gave me a weird vibe. Only 3 other rigs were parked in a lot that could easily hold 50, and the main building looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 70s. Faded yellow paint was peeling off the walls, and half the neon letters in the sign were burned out. But the diesel pumps were working, and that's what mattered. I maneuvered my truck to pump number 7, killed the engine, and climbed down from the cab. The heat hit me immediately. Had to be pushing 105 degrees. While the tank was filling, I decided to head inside for some water and maybe grab a sandwich for dinner. The automatic doors wheezed open, and the blast of air conditioning felt like heaven against my sunburned arms. The inside was even more depressing than the outside. Flickering fluorescent lights made everything look greenish and sick, and there was this smell, like old grease mixed with pine cleaner that hadn't quite done its job. The convenience store section had the usual stuff: chips, beef jerky, energy drinks, those little tree-shaped air fresheners. Behind the counter stood this guy who must have been in his early 40s, skinny as a rail with arms that seemed too long for his body. He had this bleached blonde hair that was thinning on top, combed over in a way that made it worse. His name tag said Vernon, and he was wearing a stained white tank top instead of any kind of uniform. The second I walked in, his eyes locked onto me and didn't let go. Not in the usual way guys sometimes stare. This was different, more calculating, like he was trying to memorize every detail about me. I grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler and a pre-wrapped turkey sandwich that looked at least somewhat edible, then made my way to the counter. Vernon smiled at me with teeth that were surprisingly white and straight, which somehow made everything else about him seem more wrong. "Afternoon, miss," he said, his voice higher than I expected, almost sing-song. "Don't see many lady drivers come through here. Where you headed, if you don't mind me asking?" I gave him the standard vague answer I always use. "South, got a delivery to make." But he kept pressing. "Phoenix, Las Vegas, Los Angeles. I got family all over. Might know some good spots for you to stop." His fingers were drumming on the counter. These long, pale fingers with nails bitten down to nothing, and he kept leaning forward like he was trying to close the distance between us. "Just passing through," I said firmly, pulling out my wallet to pay. He took my $20 bill, but instead of putting it in the register right away, he held it up to the light like he was checking if it was counterfeit. The whole time he kept talking. "You planning to park here tonight? We got plenty of space, real quiet, nobody bothers anybody out here." Then he did something that made my gut clench. He licked his thumb before counting out my change, maintaining eye contact the entire time. "I get off at midnight," he added, placing the coins in my palm one by one, his fingertips brushing against my skin longer than necessary. "Sometimes I walk around the lot, make sure everyone's safe, especially the ladies traveling alone. Can't be too careful these days, right?" The way he said ladies made me want to take a shower. I grabbed my stuff and headed for the door, but I could feel him watching me the whole way out. By the time I finished fueling up and found a parking spot, it was getting close to 6 in the evening. I chose a space at the far end of the lot, away from the building but still under one of the working light poles. From my cab, I could see Vernon through the store windows, and every few minutes he'd look out toward the parking lot. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was just lonely. Maybe he was harmless. But 20 years of bartending before I became a trucker had taught me to trust my instincts about people. I locked my doors, drew my curtains, and settled in for the night with my sandwich and a book. Around 9 o'clock, I heard another truck pull in, which made me feel a little better. At least I wasn't alone out here anymore. I dozed off around 10:30, my phone charging beside me and my tire iron within reach, just in case. The knock on my window came at exactly 12:17 a.m. I know because the green glow of my dashboard clock was the first thing I saw when my eyes snapped open. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, then a pause, then 3 more. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Through a gap in the curtain, I could see a figure standing right beside my driver's side door. The parking lot light cast weird shadows, but I could make out enough. It was Vernon, and he wasn't wearing a shirt anymore. His pale chest was hairless and seemed to glow in the artificial light, and I could see he was holding something in his right hand, a crowbar, the curved end catching the light as he shifted his weight from foot to foot. He knocked again, harder this time, and then he spoke, his voice muffled but still carrying that sing-song quality. "Hey there, lady driver. Saw your lights were off. You lonely out here? Thought you might want some company." I stayed absolutely still, barely breathing, praying he'd think I was asleep and leave. But Vernon wasn't giving up that easily. He started walking around my truck, dragging the crowbar along the side, making this horrible scraping sound against the metal. "I know you're awake in there," he called out, his voice getting louder. "Your curtain moved. Don't be rude now. I just want to talk." He completed a full circle around my rig, and when he got back to the driver's side, he pressed his face against the window. I could see his breath fogging up the glass, could make out those 2 white teeth in the darkness. "Come on, sweetheart. Open up. I brought us some beers. They're in my truck right over there." He pointed with the crowbar toward a beat-up Ford Ranger parked about 50 feet away that definitely hadn't been there when I'd gone to sleep. "We could have ourselves a real nice time. I've been thinking about you all evening, couldn't get you out of my head." My hand found my phone in the darkness, but when I tried to unlock it, my fingers were trembling so badly that I kept missing the numbers. Vernon must have seen the light from the screen because he suddenly got more aggressive. "Who you calling? The cops? Good luck with that, sweetheart. Nearest station is 45 minutes away. My cousin's the dispatcher anyway." He started trying the door handle, yanking on it hard enough to rock the whole cab. Then he moved to the passenger side and did the same thing there. When that didn't work, he went quiet for a moment, and that silence was somehow worse than all his talking. I finally managed to dial 911, but just like he'd said, the call wouldn't go through. No signal. Out here in the middle of nowhere, my phone was basically an expensive flashlight. I could hear him moving around outside, his bare feet slapping against the asphalt, and then came a sound that made my whole body go rigid, the hiss of air escaping from one of my tires. "Oops," Vernon called out, his voice full of fake concern. "Looks like you got yourself a flat. 2 flats actually, maybe 3 by the time I'm done. Gonna be real hard to drive out of here now, won't it?" I heard him move to another tire and I knew I had to do something. I grabbed the tire iron and my phone, using its flashlight to see, and quietly unlocked the passenger door. My plan was simple: get out on the opposite side from where he was, run to that other truck I'd heard earlier, and bang on their door until they helped me. But when I cracked the door open and looked out, my heart sank. The other truck was gone. The lot was completely empty except for me and Vernon. I pulled the door shut as quietly as I could, but he heard it. "There she is," he sang out, and I heard him running around to the passenger side. "Finally ready to play. I've been so patient, but I'm getting tired of this game." That's when something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to die in this parking lot, not at the hands of some creepy gas station attendant. I'd survived my ex-husband's drunken rages. I'd survived 3 years of driving through ice storms and mountain passes, and I sure as hell was going to survive Vernon. I gripped the tire iron tighter and moved to the driver's seat, my hand on the ignition. Even with flat tires, I could still move the truck, maybe ram his Ford, make enough noise to attract attention from the highway. But when I turned the key, Vernon did something I hadn't expected. He climbed up onto my hood. Through the windshield, I could see him clear as day, crouched there like some kind of pale gargoyle, the crowbar raised above his head. "You're going to make me break this nice windshield," he shouted, spit flying from his mouth. "That's going to cost you extra, sweetheart." He brought the crowbar down hard, and the glass spiderwebbed but didn't shatter. The second hit would go through, I knew it. But I'd already started the engine, and I did the only thing I could think of. I slammed it into reverse and floored it. Vernon went flying off the hood, landing hard on the asphalt with a sound like a sack of meat hitting concrete. I didn't stop to see if he was okay. I threw it into drive, the truck lurching forward on its ruined tires, making this awful grinding sound as the rims hit pavement. I made it to the highway entrance, sparks flying from my wheels, and just kept going. About 2 miles down the road, I saw the lights of another truck stop, a big chain one with lots of people around. I pulled in, probably ruined my rims completely, but I didn't care. The security guard there called the real cops, and they found Vernon back at his station, claiming I'd attacked him and driven off without paying for gas. But the security cameras told a different story. Turns out Vernon had done this before. 3 other female truckers had reported similar encounters over the past 2 years, but they'd all managed to drive away before it escalated. I was the 4th and the last. They arrested him that night, found rope and zip ties in his Ford, along with a collection of women's CDL licenses he'd apparently stolen from previous victims. I had to replace 4 tires and 2 rims. Cost me nearly $3,000, but I'm still driving. I just never stop at small truck stops anymore, and I always carry more than a tire iron now. The fog was eating up Highway 278 that October night in 2022, making the Alabama backwoods feel like driving through milk soup. I'd been hauling furniture from Mississippi to Atlanta for about 15 years by then, knew every pothole and speed trap between Birmingham and the Georgia line. My Peterbilt's cab had all the usual trucker decorations, pictures of my wife Nancy and our boys taped to the visor, an Elvis bobblehead my youngest got me, and my mother's old rosary swinging from the rearview mirror. That Tuesday started bad with a blown tire near Tupelo that put me 3 hours behind schedule, and by the time I hit that empty stretch of 278, the dashboard clock showed 2:47 a.m. in bright green numbers. The temperature had crashed from 70 to 40 degrees in less than an hour, turning the humid air into a wall of white mist that my high beams could barely punch through. She appeared right at the edge of where my lights reached, maybe 50 feet ahead on the passenger side, just inside the tree line. Couldn't have been older than 17, wearing what might have been a nightgown once, but now hung in shreds off her skinny frame, one shoulder completely exposed. Her dark hair was matted with leaves and dirt, hanging past her waist in thick clumps, and both her arms were waving above her head in that panicked way that hits you right in the gut. Her mouth was open like she was screaming, but I couldn't hear anything over the diesel engine. The way she moved, jerky and desperate, like a person drowning in air, made me hit the brakes hard enough to throw my coffee thermos against the windshield. My first instinct was to grab the .38. I keep under my seat. 15 years of night driving teaches you to be careful about roadside situations. But this girl, she had tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on her face, and her bare feet were bleeding, leaving dark prints on the wet asphalt as she stumbled toward my truck. I rolled down the passenger window about halfway, keeping one hand near my phone. "You hurt? You need help?" I called out, but she just kept waving and pointing back toward the woods, her mouth moving in words I couldn't make out. Then she did something that made every hair on my arm stand up. She suddenly dropped to her knees right there on the road shoulder and started clawing at the gravel with her fingernails, digging like a dog trying to unbury something. The fog swirled around her in patterns that didn't match the wind, and I swear the temperature dropped another 10 degrees in seconds. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but she must have seen the movement because she jumped up and ran straight at my truck, slamming her palms against the passenger door. Up close, I could see her lips were blue-purple, like someone who'd been in cold water too long, and there were these strange marks around her wrists. Not quite cuts, more like indentations, perfectly circular and evenly spaced. She kept mouthing the same thing over and over, and finally I could read her lips. Others. There are others. Then she spun around and sprinted back toward the trees, disappearing into the darkness between two massive oak trees that looked like they'd been there since before the Civil War. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, engine idling, trying to process what I'd just seen, before I grabbed my phone and dialed the state police. The dispatcher, a woman with a thick Montgomery accent, took my location and said units were 20 minutes out. 20 minutes feels like hours when you're sitting alone on a dark highway, wondering if that girl needs help right now. I couldn't just wait. I pulled my truck onto the shoulder, grabbed my mag light and the crowbar I keep behind the seat, and headed toward those two oak trees where she'd vanished. The ground was softer than it should have been for October, almost spongy under my boots, and there was this smell, like wet pennies mixed with antifreeze. About 30 feet into the woods, my flashlight caught something that shouldn't have been there. A blue tarp stretched between several trees, and underneath it, a hole in the ground about 4 feet wide with wooden planks around the edges like an old well. But this wasn't any well. Someone had installed a ladder made from rebar and rope that descended into pure blackness. The smart thing would have been to wait for the cops, but I kept thinking about her saying, "Others." I aimed my flashlight down the hole and nearly dropped it when I saw what was below. Maybe 8 feet down, the hole opened into what looked like a room carved out of the earth, supported by 2x4s and sheets of plywood. I could see the corner of a mattress, some shelves made from cinder blocks and boards, and what looked like dozens of mason jars filled with something dark. But the worst part was the wall. Someone had hammered eye bolts into the support beams, and hanging from each one was a length of chain ending in what were definitely shackles. The metal was shiny, recently used, not a speck of rust on them. I was backing away from the hole when I heard branches snapping behind me, heavy footsteps moving fast through the underbrush. I ran harder than I'd run since high school football, crashing through branches and thorns, that crowbar still clutched in my right hand. Behind me, the footsteps stopped abruptly, but I didn't slow down until I burst out of the tree line and saw my truck's running lights. The state police showed up 12 minutes later, 2 cruisers and then a whole parade of vehicles including FBI, search and rescue, even a forensics van from Mobile. They found the bunker exactly where I said it would be, along with evidence that at least 6 people had been kept down there recently. The mattresses were stained with blood and other fluids I don't want to think about, and those mason jars, full of teeth. Human teeth sorted by type, molars in some, incisors in others like someone was collecting them. They brought in cadaver dogs and excavators, worked that site for 3 days straight. Never found any bodies, but they found more rooms connected by narrow tunnels spreading out under the forest floor like cancer. The story made the news for about a week. Trucker discovers possible human trafficking site and all that. But they never found the girl I'd seen or whoever had been chasing me through those woods. The FBI agent in charge, a guy named Fitzgerald with eyes like a dead fish, told me I'd probably saved lives by calling it in when I did. They found fresh food down there, milk that hadn't expired yet, prescription bottles with dates from just days before. Someone had been living in that underground maze, keeping people in those chains, and they'd cleared out fast. What didn't make the news was what happened next, and why I'm writing this down now, trying to make sense of it all. Because 3 weeks after that night on Highway 278, things got personal, in a way that still makes me check my mirrors more than I should. The first text came while I was fueling up at a Love station near Meridian. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. No area code, just 10 zeros. The message read, "Douglas Brennan, Peterbilt 579. License Alabama JKR 8823. You should have kept driving. My full name, my exact truck model, my plate number that I'd just renewed 2 months prior. I showed it to the station manager, thinking maybe it was some kind of scam, but he just shrugged and said truckers get weird messages all the time. The second text came that same night while I was sleeping in my cab at a rest stop. The girl wasn't lost. She was bait. Stop talking to the badges. This time there was a photo attached. Me, taken from behind while I was walking into the FBI field office in Birmingham the week before. Whoever took it had been close enough that I could see the coffee stain on my flannel shirt. By the end of that week, 4 other drivers from my company had gotten similar texts. All of them had driven that stretch of 278 in the past month, and all the messages had their real names, truck details, even their home addresses. One driver, Kevin Garrett, got a video of his daughter walking out of her elementary school in Huntsville. Another guy, Paul something or other, received a close-up photo of his wife's car parked at her job, with a message saying, "Beautiful family. Shame if they traveled alone." We all reported it to the FBI, but Fitzgerald just said they were investigating and told us to vary our routes, stay alert. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one pulling loads through Alabama back roads at night, jumping every time his phone buzzed, wondering if whoever had been keeping people in chains underground was now watching him eat at truck stops, sleep at rest areas, call his family from empty parking lots. The last text I got was different from the others. It came on a Wednesday morning while I was home with Nancy and the boys, trying to pretend everything was normal. Just coordinates, 33. 5186 degree N, 85.7801 degree Lulu, and 2 words, she's waiting. I plugged those numbers into my GPS and they led to a spot about 2 miles from where I'd seen the girl, deeper in the same forest. Part of me wanted to ignore it, delete the message, maybe even change careers and never drive a truck again. But I kept thinking about that girl's blue lips, her bloody feet, the way she'd mouthed others with such desperation. That afternoon, I told Nancy I was going to the hardware store, but instead I drove out to those coordinates with my 38 loaded and the FBI field office on speed dial. The location was an old logging road, overgrown with kudzu, barely wide enough for a pickup truck. At the end of the road was a cleared area with a single unmarked white van, windows painted black, engine running but nobody inside. On the driver's seat was a manila envelope with my name written in careful block letters. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. The girl I'd seen that night, but in different clothes, different ages, going back maybe 5 years. In some, she was smiling, looked healthy, normal. In others, she was with different people, always in wooded areas, always wearing that same expression of practiced distress. The last photo showed her sitting in what looked like a diner booth, wearing regular clothes, drinking a milkshake, and laughing at something off camera. On the back, someone had written, "Ashley performs 3 times a week. Good drivers stop. Curious drivers dig deeper. Stupid drivers become problems. Which one are you?" I left everything exactly where I found it, drove straight to the FBI office, and handed it all over to Fitzgerald. 2 days later, he called to say the van was gone. The logging road showed no tire tracks, and the photos I'd given him were just blank paper. That was 8 months ago, and I haven't driven Highway 278 since. Late July 2011, and I was hauling a load of frozen goods from Michigan down to Tennessee. Been driving trucks for about 6 years at that point, mostly regional runs that kept me within a day's drive of home. I was 38, divorced, and pretty much married to the job by then. That night found me pulling into a truck stop just off Interstate 65, somewhere between Louisville and Nashville. The place was one of those massive plazas with maybe 200 parking spots, a diner that never closed, and shower facilities that truckers like me lived for after 14 hours on the road. I remember checking my watch as I parked. It was just past 11 p.m., and the lot was about 3/4 full. The shower building sat maybe 150 feet from where I'd managed to squeeze my Peterbilt between two other rigs. After grabbing my shower bag and fresh clothes from the sleeper cab, I made my way across the lot. The walk there was uneventful, just the usual hum of idling engines and the occasional hiss of air brakes. The shower facility was pretty standard, concrete block building painted beige, fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick, and that weird mix of diesel fumes and industrial cleaner smell. I paid my $12 at the counter to a kid who couldn't have been more than 19, got my receipt with the door code, and headed to stall number 7. The shower itself was heaven, after sweating through Indiana's humidity all day. I must have stood under that hot water for 20 minutes, just letting it work out the knots in my shoulders and wash away the road grime. When I finally stepped out around 11:45, the parking lot had taken on a different character. Most of the overhead lights were still working, but they created these long shadows between the trucks that hadn't been as noticeable before. I could hear a dog barking somewhere in the distance, probably from one of the cabs, and the sound of someone's radio playing old country music. As I walked past the fuel islands, I noticed a Freightliner with its high beams on, pointed straight across the lot. At first I figured the driver had forgotten to turn them off. Happens all the time when guys are tired. But then the lights flicked off for a second, then back on, off again, on again. The pattern was deliberate, almost like Morse code, except there was no rhythm to it. I kept walking, my wet hair starting to feel cold in the night air, and tried to ignore it. About halfway to my truck, I realized those high beams were tracking me. Every few steps I took, I could hear the low rumble of an engine adjusting, and the light beam would shift to keep me in its glare. The Freightliner was actually turning, just slightly, repositioning itself as I moved through the lot. My truck was still 4 rows away, and I had to weave between other rigs to get there. Each time I passed behind another trailer, blocking the light temporarily, I could hear that engine rev up, like the driver was agitated he'd lost sight of me. The intensity of those lights made it impossible to see who was behind the wheel, just a bright white void where the windshield should be. I picked up my pace, not quite running, but definitely moving faster than my usual stride. My shower bag kept bumping against my leg, and I could feel water from my hair dripping down my back, soaking through my clean shirt. The Freightliner's engine went quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe the driver had given up whatever weird game he was playing. But then I heard a door slam, that distinctive metallic thud of a cab door closing hard. I glanced back and saw a figure climbing down from the Freightliner. He was tall, maybe 6'3" or 6'4", wearing what looked like coveralls and a baseball cap pulled low. The way he moved wasn't right, not the typical tired shuffle of a driver who'd been on the road too long. He was moving with purpose, cutting diagonally across the lot, clearly trying to intercept my path. What really made my gut tighten was seeing him reach back into his cab and pull out something long and metal. In the mixed lighting of the lot, it took me a second to recognize it as a tire iron. My truck was still 2 rows away, and this guy was closing the distance faster than I was comfortable with. I ducked between 2 refrigerated trailers, their cooling units humming loud enough to mask my footsteps. Through the gap under one trailer, I could see his boots, worn Red Wings with duct tape around one toe, stopping right where I'd been walking moments before. He stood there for what felt like forever but was probably only 10 seconds, just waiting, listening. Then those boots started moving again, slower this time, heading toward the front of the trailers where he probably figured I'd come out. Instead, I doubled back, staying low, using the shadows and the noise from the reefer units as cover. I made it to the next row of trucks, my heart hammering so hard I was sure everyone in the lot could hear it. Through the maze of trailers and mud flaps, I could see my Peterbilt, dark blue with a custom chrome grille that suddenly seemed way too distinctive. The problem was getting to it without crossing 30 feet of open space under those bright pole lights. I could hear him moving somewhere behind me, the occasional scrape of metal against metal as that tire iron hit a trailer or bumper. Then I heard something that made every muscle in my body tense up. He was whistling. Not a tune exactly, just this low, breathy whistle, like he was calling a dog. The sound echoed off the trailers, making it hard to tell exactly where he was. I pressed myself against the rear doors of a Swift trailer, trying to think. My keys were in my pocket, but getting into the cab, starting the engine and pulling out would take time I wasn't sure I had. That's when I noticed another driver, a heavy-set guy in a Broncos jersey, walking toward the restrooms. He was maybe 50 feet away, and I almost called out to him. But right as I opened my mouth, the whistling stopped. Dead silence except for the idling engines. I peeked around the corner of the trailer and saw my stalker standing perfectly still between two trucks, that tire iron held loose at his side, just watching the other driver pass. The second the guy disappeared into the restroom building, the whistling started again, closer this time. I could actually see him now through the landing gear of the trailer I was hiding behind. He was methodically checking between each truck, swinging that tire iron in little circles like he had all the time in the world. His face was still hidden under that cap, but I could see he had a scraggly beard with something white in it, maybe dried toothpaste or food. I knew I had to move. My legs were starting to cramp from crouching, and he was only 3 trucks away from finding me. I took a deep breath, gripped my shower bag tight, and made a break for it. The moment I started running, I heard him react. Boots pounding on asphalt, that tire iron clanging against something metal. I didn't look back, just focused on my truck's door handle. My fingers fumbled with the keys, slipping once on the lock before I got it open. I practically threw myself inside, slamming the door and hitting the locks in one motion. Through the side mirror, I saw him stop about 10 feet away, just standing there in the light from the pole lamp. For the first time, I got a clear look at his face. Weathered skin, maybe mid-50s, with these pale gray eyes that didn't blink once. He tilted his head like he was considering something, then raised that tire iron and pointed it at me through the window. Not threatening exactly, more like he was marking me, filing me away for later. I started the engine, my whole body trembling now that I was relatively safe. But he didn't move, didn't try to approach the truck. He just stood there watching as I put it in gear. As I pulled forward, I had to drive past him to get to the exit, and he actually stepped aside to let me through, giving this little mock bow as I passed. In my mirrors, I watched him walk calmly back toward his Freightliner, tossing the tire iron up and catching it like it was a baton. I didn't stop driving for another 2 hours, finally pulling into a well-lit pilot station near the Kentucky border. When I checked my truck during my pre-trip inspection the next morning at a different stop, I found something that still makes me sick to think about. There were fresh scratches on my trailer doors, spelling out my license plate number, like he'd carved it there before I'd even gotten back from my shower. I reported the incident to the state police and the truck stop management, gave them every detail I could remember. The cop who took my report said they'd had similar complaints from other female drivers over the past few months, always at different stops along that stretch of I-65. Same pattern, the high beams, the stalking, the tire iron. One driver from Indiana said she'd found her air brake lines partially cut after an encounter just like mine. Another reported finding her trailer seal broken and her cargo disturbed, even though nothing was stolen. They never caught the guy. The Freightliner's plates I managed to glimpse were registered to a company that had gone out of business 3 years earlier. The truck stop's security cameras conveniently had a blind spot right where he'd parked. The police said he probably scouts these lots for women driving alone, maybe listening to CB chatter or watching for single drivers at the fuel islands. They advised me to start carrying protection and to always park near other trucks I knew. I still drive that route sometimes. It's good money and I can't afford to be picky about loads. But I never stop at that plaza anymore, and I never shower at night at any truck stop. I've met other female drivers who've changed their routines too, some who've even quit altogether because of experiences like this. We share information at stops, warning each other about suspicious vehicles or drivers who give us bad feelings. Last month, a driver named Bethany told me she'd seen a Freightliner with its high beams on at a rest area near Indianapolis, just sitting there, watching. She said when she looked closer, she could see scratches on the driver's door. Numbers and letters, dozens of them, carved into the paint like some kind of collection. We both know what those probably are. The truth is, he's still out there, probably with a new truck by now, maybe a different tactic. But those pale gray eyes and that tire iron, I know exactly what he's looking for, and every female trucker on I-65 drives a little faster through that stretch of road. "23 years behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler, and I thought I'd seen everything the road could throw at me. Wrong turns in the middle of nowhere, black ice that turned highways into skating rinks, even a tornado that touched down maybe half a mile from where I'd pulled over. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened on that Monday morning in early May 2017. I was hauling a load of dairy equipment from Madison down to Milwaukee, a route I'd done probably 100 times before. The sun had just started burning through the morning fog, and I remember thinking how perfect the weather was. Not too hot, not too cold, visibility getting better by the minute. I'd been up since 4, grabbed coffee and eggs at this little diner off Highway 151, where the waitress, Dolores, always remembered how I liked my toast barely golden, just warm enough to melt butter. The overpass on County Road K had always been part of my regular route, one of those concrete structures you pass under without giving it a second thought. Built in the 70s, according to the date stamp I'd noticed once when traffic had me crawling underneath it. That morning I was doing about 55, keeping it steady, when I heard this sound. Like somebody dragging a massive chain across concrete, but deeper, more guttural. The whole cab started vibrating in this weird, rhythmic pattern that didn't match the engine or the road surface. Through my mirrors, I could see the overpass maybe 200 feet behind me, and at first everything looked normal. Then I saw it, a crack spreading across the support pillar like lightning in slow motion, chunks of concrete the size of refrigerators starting to separate from the main structure. My first instinct was to hit the gas, get as much distance as possible between me and whatever was about to happen back there. But here's where everything went sideways, literally. The road beneath me wasn't just road anymore. It was moving, tilting at this impossible angle that made no sense to my brain. You know that feeling when you're on a boat and a big wave hits? Multiply that by 1,000, except you're in a 40-ton vehicle going 55 miles per hour. The asphalt was cracking, splitting open like the earth had decided to yawn, right there under my wheels. I could hear the trailer behind me groaning, metal twisting in ways it was never designed to twist. Through my passenger side mirror, I watched the overpass just fold. Not collapse, not crumble. It folded in on itself like someone had scored it down the middle and bent it backwards. Cars that had been crossing above were sliding off the edges, and I'll never forget the sound of all that weight hitting the ground, like thunder that wouldn't stop rolling. My rig started jackknifing, the trailer swinging out to the left while the cab kept trying to go straight. The steering wheel was useless at that point. Might as well have been trying to steer a shopping cart down a waterfall. Everything in the cab went airborne. My logbook, coffee mug, the little wooden cross my daughter had given me for good luck, all of it floating for this surreal moment before gravity remembered its job. The windshield spider-webbed but didn't shatter, and through all those cracks I could see the ground coming up fast, except it wasn't where the ground was supposed to be. We were falling, the whole rig and me, falling through what used to be solid highway. The altimeter on my GPS was going crazy, numbers dropping like a countdown, and I remember thinking, this is it. This is how it ends. Not in some dramatic movie scene, but on a Monday morning hauling dairy equipment, while Dolores is probably still pouring coffee for the breakfast crowd. The impact came in stages. First, the front wheels hit something solid. Turned out to be a support beam that had fallen horizontally across the gap. The whole cab pitched forward so violently that my seatbelt felt like it was trying to cut me in half. Then came the second hit when the trailer caught up, slamming into the back of the cab with enough force to blow out the rear window. Glass showered everywhere, and I could taste copper in my mouth, bit my tongue nearly clean through without realizing it. The engine was screaming, still trying to run even though we were suspended at this insane angle. Nose down, maybe 30 feet above what used to be the roadway below. I could smell diesel fuel leaking, hear it splashing somewhere beneath me. And all I could think about was those safety videos they make you watch about fuel fires, and how you've got maybe 90 seconds to get out before everything goes up. My door was jammed against a massive chunk of concrete, wouldn't budge no matter how hard I kicked. The passenger door was my only option, but it meant climbing across the cab while hanging in my seatbelt like some kind of demented jungle gym. Every movement made the whole rig shift and groan, pieces of the collapsed overpass still falling around us, bouncing off the trailer with these hollow metallic gongs. I managed to get the passenger door open. It swung out and down, hanging into empty space. Below me, I could see twisted rebar sticking up like giant metal thorns, chunks of concrete the size of compact cars, and somewhere in all that mess, other vehicles that hadn't been as lucky as me. That's when I heard her. A woman's voice coming from one of those cars, screaming for help. Not panicked screaming, but deliberate, measured calls, like she was trying to conserve energy. Made the whole thing real in a way that my own situation hadn't quite registered yet. Getting out meant letting go of everything I knew about safety and just trusting physics I didn't understand. I unclipped my seatbelt while bracing against the steering wheel, immediately sliding toward the passenger door. My work boots found purchase on the center console, then the door frame, and I basically had to spider crawl out while the whole cab swayed like a drunk trying to stand still. The metal was hot from friction, burning through my gloves, and I could feel the truck shifting with every pound of pressure I put on different spots. Once I got outside, standing on what was technically the passenger door while holding onto the mirror mount, I could see the full scope of the disaster. The overpass hadn't just collapsed, it had taken out a section of the highway maybe 300 feet long. My rig was caught on debris about halfway down, like a toy truck dropped in a construction site. Above me, people were gathering at the edges of the intact road, some filming with their phones, others shouting down asking if I was okay. The woman's voice came again, clearer now that I was outside. She was in a silver minivan about 40 feet below me, the vehicle crushed between two concrete slabs but somehow maintaining just enough space inside to keep her alive. I could see her hand waving through a gap in the wreckage, and she was saying she couldn't feel her legs, real calm about it, like she was reporting the weather. I knew I had to get down there, but the path was nothing but twisted metal, broken concrete, and exposed rebar that looked sharp enough to go through you like a hot knife through butter. Started making my way down anyway, using the trailer's undercarriage as a ladder, then jumping to a relatively stable piece of roadway that had landed at an angle. My ankle rolled when I landed, heard it pop, but adrenaline's funny that way. Didn't feel a thing until much later. Could hear sirens in the distance, but they sounded so far away, and this woman kept talking, telling me her name was Grace, that she was a teacher, had 32 students waiting for her, and could I please just stay with her until help came. I spent the next 40 minutes holding Grace's hand through a gap, barely wide enough for our fingers to touch. She told me about her classroom, how she decorated it with paper butterflies the kids had made, how one student, Anthony, always brought her apple slices because he'd decided teachers needed vitamins. Her voice would fade sometimes, and I'd squeeze her fingers, tell her about my roots, the weird things you see at 3 in the morning on empty highways. A guy in a tuxedo walking a peacock on a leash, a broken piano sitting perfectly centered in the middle of the road like someone had placed it there on purpose. Anything to keep her talking, keep her conscious. The diesel smell was getting stronger, and I could see fluid pooling under several vehicles. Other survivors were emerging from the wreckage. A family of 4 from a crushed SUV, all miraculously able to walk, and an elderly man who kept asking what year it was, blood running down his face from a gash that looked like someone had unzipped his scalp. We formed this bizarre little community in the ruins, helping each other, sharing water from a cooler someone had pulled from their destroyed car. First responders finally rappelled down about an hour after the collapse. Watching them work was like watching a choreographed dance. Every movement deliberate, calculated, no wasted energy. They got Grace out using the jaws of life, and I'll never forget the sound those tools make. like giant metal teeth chewing through a tin can. She was conscious the whole time, even managed to squeeze my hand one more time before they lifted her into the basket. The paramedic who checked me out said my ankle was broken in 2 places, had been walking on it for almost an hour, and asked if I was some kind of superhuman. Told him no, just a truck driver who needed to help someone. They hauled my rig out 3 days later, took 2 massive cranes working in tandem. The cab was twisted beyond recognition, the trailer split open like a cracked egg. The insurance adjuster who came to look at it just stood there shaking his head, kept saying, "Nobody should have survived this," over and over like a mantra. The investigation started 2 weeks later. Federal inspectors, state officials, guys in suits with clipboards and cameras documenting every inch of the collapse. They interviewed me 4 separate times, always the same questions but phrased differently, like they were trying to catch me in some kind of lie. Did I notice anything unusual about the overpass before? Had I felt any vibrations on previous trips? Was I carrying more than my permitted weight? The answers were always no, no, and definitely no. My load was actually underweight that day, had all the paperwork to prove it. Then one inspector, a woman named Jimenez with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much, pulled me aside after the 3rd interview. She couldn't say much, legal reasons, but she told me to pay attention to the news in the coming weeks. Said sometimes the real horror isn't what happens, but why it was allowed to happen. I didn't understand what she meant until the story broke about Harbor Construction, the subcontractor responsible for maintaining that stretch of infrastructure. Turns out Harbor Construction had been filing inspection reports for bridges and overpasses they'd never actually inspected. 3 years of documents, all signed and stamped, describing detailed examinations of structures they'd never even visited. The owner, a guy named Christopher Lawson, had been pocketing the inspection money while paying some kid fresh out of community college to fabricate the reports using Google Earth images and weather data to make them look authentic. The overpass that collapsed? According to their files, it had passed a complete structural inspection just 6 weeks before it fell. In reality, nobody had physically looked at it in over 4 years. The support pillar that failed had been slowly deteriorating from water damage and freeze-thaw cycles, cracks spreading through the concrete like cancer. If anyone had actually bothered to look, to really look, they would have seen it. Grace ended up paralyzed from the waist down. 3 people died in cars I never even saw, all because somebody decided their profit margin was worth more than doing the job they were paid to do. Lawson got 8 years in prison. The families got settlements. I got a new rig and nightmares that still wake me up sometimes, that sound of concrete tearing apart playing on repeat. But I'm driving again. Same routes, different bridges, and you better believe I look at every single overpass differently now. I'd only been on the road for about 9 months when this happened. Still green enough to feel cautious about every unfamiliar stop, but comfortable enough behind the wheel to believe I could handle myself. I'd taken a late load heading east through Missouri, hauling refrigerated goods to a chain store in a town I'd never even heard of. The trip was uneventful until around 2:30 a.m., when I pulled into a rest stop off the highway. I remember thinking it looked oddly deserted for that hour. No idling engines, no movement, just a dimly lit parking area and the distant hum of insects in the trees lining the lot. It wasn't my first time sleeping in the cab, and I'd gotten used to the routine. Parked near the lights, doors locked, keys in easy reach. I slid into the sleeper and pulled a hoodie over my head to block the glow from the overhead lamps. I think I'd just started to drift when I heard a knock. Not sharp or desperate, just a few steady raps on the driver's side door. I peeked through the curtain and saw a man standing there, maybe mid-40s, wearing a navy work shirt and cargo pants stained around the knees. He had this upright posture, like he was trying not to look impatient. I cracked the window an inch and asked if everything was all right. He said he was another driver, parked 2 spots over and needed help with a heavy box in his cab. Said he tweaked his back earlier unloading and couldn't lift it alone. I glanced over to where he pointed. There was indeed a truck there, dark red, older model with no visible company markings. No lights on, no engine running. I told him I wasn't comfortable leaving my truck, especially in the middle of the night. He didn't argue. He just stood there a second longer, gave me this tight nod and turned away. I waited until he was out of sight before I locked everything back up, and for a while I just sat there listening. I expected to hear his engine kick on, maybe the thump of his doors shutting. But there was nothing, no movement, just that same weird stillness like the whole place had gone hollow. After maybe 10 minutes of silence, I started to feel like I was being watched. Not in the paranoid way, but in the subtle, creeping way that makes your spine draw tight without knowing why. That's when I noticed something in my mirror. His truck had moved. It was now parked directly behind mine, just a few feet off my bumper. I hadn't heard it move. No headlights, no engine rumble. Nothing. Just silence. And suddenly, he was there. The red truck sat at a slant, blocking the only clear path I had out of the lot. I turned off my dome light and stayed low in the sleeper, watching from the shadows behind the curtain. A minute or two passed before I saw him again. He stepped out of his cab and walked a slow circle around both trucks like he was thinking, or waiting. His walk was deliberate, not rushed, not casual, just methodical, like he had all night. My truck was still running, so I slipped quietly into the driver's seat without turning any lights on. The guy disappeared behind my trailer for a second, and that's when I seized the chance. I threw it into drive and jerked the wheel hard left, aiming for the grassy strip that separated the truck lot from the car section. It was bumpy, uneven terrain, but the rig handled it better than I thought it would. I heard the trailer scrape something, maybe a concrete divider, but I didn't care. I just needed distance. As soon as I hit pavement again, I gunned it. I didn't even look back until I reached the next on-ramp, where I pulled into a gas station that was brightly lit and full of cars. I parked near the front, under a floodlight, and sat there with the engine humming and the doors locked. I wasn't shaking or crying. It wasn't that kind of fear. It was more like a hard, cold alertness that pressed down on everything. I couldn't stop thinking about how easily that could have gone differently if I'd stepped out, or if I'd fallen back asleep. I stayed there until the sun started coming up. I wasn't due to drop the load until late morning, so I called dispatch and made up a story about a delay with construction to cover the detour. I didn't tell them the real reason. It felt too strange to explain, and I didn't want to sound like I'd panicked over nothing. Still, something about that rest stop stuck with me. A few days later, I was at a different terminal, talking with an older driver I'd met once before, and he mentioned that stretch of highway. Said it gave him bad vibes. I asked why, and he told me 2 guys had gone missing from that same rest stop about a month back. No sign of them. Trucks abandoned, no footage, just gone. That hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't told him anything about what happened to me. I hadn't told anyone. But hearing that, it glued everything into place. That guy at the rest stop wasn't just looking for help with a box. He had a plan. He'd done it before, and he was patient enough to wait around for hours, banking on me being tired enough, trusting enough, to step out of my cab. Maybe he thought I'd eventually crack, or maybe he was just playing the odds. Either way, I didn't like how close I came to being one of those missing drivers. I looked up the news when I got home, digging through local reports. There wasn't much, just a short article buried under traffic updates and weather. 2 long-haul drivers, both last seen at the same rest stop, both trucks found in place with the doors open and keys still inside. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, just empty cabs. One of them was from out of state on his first solo run. That detail stuck with me. I thought about his family, how they probably expected him home in a few days. How maybe all it took was a guy with a clean shirt and a calm voice. After that, I stopped sleeping at rest stops completely. I only pulled into truck plazas with cameras, lights, and people. And even then, I never left the cab unless it was broad daylight. I upgraded the locks on both doors and got a steel baton I kept wedged beside the seat. Every time I parked, I backed into a spot with a straight exit path and checked all my mirrors twice. It wasn't paranoia, it was math. That guy had probably done this more than twice, and I just happened to be the one who didn't take the bait. I still wonder what was in that box he mentioned, if there ever was a box at all. Part of me thinks it was just something to say, a way to lure someone close enough. But sometimes, in those quiet moments on the road, I picture him standing in the dark, holding something heavy in his arms. Not a package, not freight, just something he needed help carrying. And I remember how easily I could have said yes.